So, hi everybody. Thanks for joining us for another In Conversation With. So, if you're joining us on the Friday night over on the Azure Live twitch.tv channel, thanks so much for tuning in. Please do take part in the chat below and don't forget to give the channel a follow and you'll get notified when we go live next time. Equally, if you're watching this on catch up on YouTube, thanks so much for watching. Please don't forget to give us a thumbs up and click that notification bell and obviously subscribe to the channel. That would be absolutely superb. Okay then, so my next guest this week, well, he's an Azure MVP. He works in and around Azure as well as being a well-accomplished developer in his own rights. He enjoys using the latest and greatest of tool sets and platforms, some of which we hope to delve into a little bit in this conversation today. So on that note, my guest this week on In Conversation With is Mr. Mark Allan. Hi, Mark. How you doing?
Hi, John. I'm all right. So apart from nearly choking on my dinner there in the pre-record.
I know, I should really move the time I record these. Everybody's noshing down their lunch and then comes on and starts choking. No, thanks so much for joining me. Obviously, I know we had a bit of a catch-up a few weeks back. You agreed to come on and talk to me in and around the world of serverless, which is going to be an education for me, absolutely. But, I mean, before we kick off with all that goodness, I mean, I don't know if you want to give yourself a bit of an introduction, let people know who you are, what you do, and all that good stuff.
Obviously I'm Mark Allan, as it says. That's my handle on everything, Mark XO. So if you want to find me on LinkedIn or GitHub or Twitter or anything, that's what I go by. That was originally my mainframe login. Some people ask what the X stands for, and it stands for does not have a middle name, but needs to have a middle name for the purposes of the mainframe. So that's what the X.
Yeah, of course.
I'm based in Northern Ireland, right up on the north coast, so near the Giant's Causeway, if anybody knows that. I've been an Azure MVP for about 3 years now, I think, but I've been using Azure literally since it came out. So I was there back in the days of web roles and worker roles, and indeed in the times before Azure actually had VMs, it was just web roles and worker roles and storage. And before that, I've been a developer all the way through. I have so far managed to cling on to that, despite people trying to persuade me to do other things. I've been a developer in one form or another since the middle of the 1970s or so. We can talk through that long and storied history at some point if you want.
No, I was going to say, Mark, I mean, I've had a plethora of guests on this show already. We've kind of focused quite a lot on keeping your skills up to date, what it's like being an operations person, going over to the developer world, and, this whole DevOps mix of skills that we kind of see happening. Certainly have been happening over the last few years. So, I mean, it's great to speak to somebody like you who is essentially a developer. There we go. Just as the ice cream van kicks in.
It means those developers can get rid of the ops people now because we can do it all ourselves.
Well, there we go. So am I out of a job? Have I got to learn something really big and new? And I mean, I think this is what sparked the conversation before, because obviously when we're on Twitter, just having a bit of a to and fro, it was kind of like, you'd be happy to come on and talk me through serverless and kind of what that means in Azure terms. So, I mean, obviously using your past experience of how you came to be a developer in today's world, using Azure and using all these fantastic technologies and platforms. I mean, I don't know if you want to give us a little bit of a brief tour of that and why serverless and what is serverless? Massive questions to kick off with.
I mean, like I say, I started coding in the 70s, usual sort of thing. I actually started on a mainframe because my dad had a mainframe in the office, and he used to take me into the office during school holidays. And his office happened to be next door to the computer room. So what he would do is he'd drop me in the computer room and say, "Here, play games." So I would get onto the teletype and type, play text games. And then, sort of like one day I said, "Hey, Dad, how do I change this game so it works differently? Because it's too hard at the moment." So he showed me how to go and edit basic code. So that's where I became a developer. So I started off in a mainframe, then moved on to the ZX80 and the ZX81 and the ZX Spectrum, as a lot of people in that era did. And then, from there, people actually started being interested in the stuff I was writing for the Spectrum, so I made a little bit of money on the side like that, and then I went and worked for. Do you remember a company called ICL back in the day?
Yeah, ICL. Well, they were the mainframe, one of the big mainframe companies back in the day, weren't they? ICL,
yeah, that's right. So their sort of central mainframe location was in West Gorton in Manchester, which was just down the road from me. So so I got a job there, and sort of cycled in every day, and sort of got into the mainframes there. And one of the early things that I started working on that was what they had a thing called a node support computer, which was actually basically a PC that lived inside the mainframe and was essentially there just to monitor and look after all the different components in the mainframe and enable them and disable them and stuff. So that was sort of in the late 80s, early 90s sort of time. But so that was when I got into actual PCs. So I got into DOS then, and Windows 1 came along, and we started doing some stuff with Windows 1. So that's how I came into being a full-time professional developer. Used a lot of different things, but as happens to all people who can do computers, one day somebody says, "Oh, can you do me a website?"
So, been there, yeah.
So I started having this, again, a bit of a sideline of doing websites for people back in the days of HTML1. And eventually I started hosting them for people as well. So right back at the start, that was literally a case of I had a PC in my room. I had a 56k modem connection, and I would try and keep this 56k modem connection connected so that these little initial websites, these were just hobbyist things in those days. It wasn't actually businesses, but so that people can have these 56k websites up most of the time. And then I started, once sort of it got a bit, sort of the connections got a bit more modern, and we started getting onto things where you could actually have phones and modems connected at the same time on the same sort of phone connection. Then I started doing proper hosting for people. So I ended up actually being a very, very small hosting operation. I actually had a computer there. It was connected up to the broadband, and it would actually host websites for people. Moved on from that. So that's the point at which you're doing everything yourself. And that's where you get it's just a complete nightmare looking after stuff yourself, because disks break, your computer overheats, all that sort of stuff. So eventually I decided to bite the bullet, and I got an ISP and got a dedicated server in an ISP's hosting room. So it was still hardware, it was still a physical machine, but at least it was somebody else's job to look after that machine.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So this is the first step towards what became the cloud. But first of all, you still had to ring them if something went wrong. You still had to ring them up and say, "Hey, something's gone wrong. Can you sort it out for me, please?" So next step was virtual machines. So sort of that point, you kind of get rid of the hardware problems, but you're still sitting there with an operating system, and there's still people out there who are hacking your machines. So next step after that is that somebody hacks your websites, and then everybody, these little businesses who are running your websites, they're very, very quick at getting on the phone and saying, "Hey, where's my website gone?"
Something's not right. Come and fix it. Absolutely.
So that's that's the point at I mean, I lived with that for a good while, but eventually Azure came along, and it came along with these things called web roles, where you could actually. So that was the first platform as a service that I personally had come across. Heroku had been around for a while by then, but I hadn't got as far as using that. But Azure came along, and I thought, web roles, that's what I need. So I started putting websites onto these web roles, and that just the whole platform thing just made life so much easier, so much more relaxing. Once it was there, and somebody else was dealing with all the hardware, all the networking, all the keeping the connections up. They were dealing with people trying to hack whatever operating system was under there. So that was my introduction to the cloud, and that was at that point, once I got something onto platform as a service, that was the point at which I decided, right, no more VMs for me ever. So
yeah, and well, I mean, to chip in there, Mark, that was something we discussed just before we kind of started this recording now, and it's quite a big statement to say that, because I think you mentioned you haven't deployed a VM in a decade, and all your development work is done now. And I think maybe for a lot of people, and for some people that may be watching this video, serverless seems this new terminology that's kind of sprung up over the last year or two, I guess, from from the Azure platform. But what does that mean to you, this term serverless? Is it just a branding terminology, something that kind of sticks and another buzzword, or is there some meaning?
If I carry on if I carry on from there, what I then started doing, I mean, long story short, I Windows Phone 7 came along, and I built myself a little sports app for it, just for my own personal use. And what it would do is, it would get, sort of, it would display the match information and the news and stuff from RSS feeds and stuff like that, so that I, Manchester United being my team, I could see all the Manchester United news on my phone.
Sure, yeah.
But of course, other Manchester United fans that were friends of mine, they saw this thing and said, "Oh, can you publish that so we can use it?" And that started growing. And what I ended up doing, I had this mobile app at the front end, and then in the back end, I had web roles and worker roles running to go and fetch all that information and publish it out to an API. And now the thing about a sports app is, obviously, it gets a lot busier when there's a match on.
Okay,
and I spent a lot of time trying to reduce my costs, because this was starting to cost me money, and ads were kind of just about covering it. But essentially, I had to have my web roles, which are what is now these days app services, configured so that it would grow. The usual sort of thing, when your CPU hits 80%, or when your memory hits 80%, then run up, fire up another instance, and double your costs, but double your computing power.
Yeah, with you.
And I had lots of different things running to go and do different things about fetching information and publishing information and things, for all the various teams that I was looking after and things. So I had lots of little processes here, and I was desperately trying to cram this as efficiently as possible into this machine, so that I would not have to run up more, instances, essentially, managed VMs in the background, and than I needed. And I was having real trouble with this. And that was the point at which Azure Functions came along.
Okay.
And it was designed to fix my exact problem there. What I could now do was, I didn't even need to worry about how many instances I was running, what my CPU usage was. I could completely ignore the fact that there were servers under there. Each of these different things that I needed to run, I could just put as a separate Azure function, and Azure, the consumption runtime would automatically scale those for me, just purely based on how busy it was. And all this stuff that I've been writing and doing, all of a sudden was provided for me. So that was my epiphany of serverless. Was that here I am, I'm just an individual developer, really price conscious, and here is something that will wind down to zero when I'm not, when nobody's using it, that will wind up to infinity if if it's the Manchester derbies on at that point. And it's just really efficient, really cost effective, and it takes away yet more of the stuff that I wouldn't want to care about. So yes, the servers under there. Serverless doesn't mean no servers, but it means you don't have to care about the servers. And again, just removing that layer of management, and leaving you literally at the point where you just write the code, you throw the code at the cloud and say, run this code, and it runs the code in just scaling it, just looking after it, just doing whatever it needs to do to run that code when that code needs to be run. So that's to me what serverless is this idea that you give it the code and it does everything else for you. And you've got, and with the side effect of this consumption-based pricing, so going hopefully from zero up to as much as you need. Usually imposing some sort of limit on there, because you never know when you're going to get a denial of
Yeah, I was going to say, Mark, in terms of, so I mean, you focus there pretty quickly on Azure Functions being that niche development or that platform within Azure that you can consume as a developer that scales from 0 to infinity. I mean, is it that black and white for Azure Functions, or do Azure, do Microsoft offer, like they do with most Azure services, certain plans that you might want to enact for various different scenarios, or is it just a one size fits all? What is Azure Functions like in Azure?
Yeah, so you got the basic consumption plan, which is the original thing that they had, and I still use it as much as possible. And that like I say, that's very very much abstracted from everything. So you're just giving it the code and running it.
Okay.
What they subsequently introduced was for enterprises or for companies with extreme requirements on things like cold start. They introduced what's called the premium plan. So you've probably heard of cold start in a serverless scenario, which
Sure.
is essentially that if nothing's running and you're paying nothing, then your code probably isn't actually running on anything at the point at which somebody wants, at which the first request then happens. So you've got usually got this cold start thing going on, where it actually has to fire up a bit of something somewhere on some container or some VM or other to actually get start up your program and start processing.
So I guess that'll be like that. That'll affect your application performance for that first user that calls it. Yeah, with you. Okay.
Depending, if it's an automated, if it's just a robot that's coming in, then not such a problem. But if it's your website running or an API running, and somebody is actually sitting there watching and waiting for this thing to start, your 100 milliseconds grace or whatever you get before somebody gets annoyed when a web page doesn't load. You've got to give it that. So. So the premium plan does is it kind of goes back a little bit towards the app service platform as a service thing. What it does is it starts you with at least one instance always. So there's always something there that runs for your cold start. So you never have that cold start problem. And what it then tries to do is to always provision one more than you need. So at the point at which you're too busy in your first instance and you need a second instance to cope with the amount of traffic you'll get, that instance is already there. So the idea is it's a very smooth graph of sort of performance versus amount of traffic going through.
Yeah, I'm with you.
The other thing about a premium plan is it's designed to run inside a VNet. So if you're the sort of customer who feels like you need to have that VNet there so that you can tick that box of yes, I've got a network around everything, I don't care, I'm not going to do it the hard way and secure all my endpoints. I'm just going to wrap a network around everything, and then I'm safe and nobody will ever hack me.
Right. Okay. I mean, that's a valid point, though, I suppose, when it comes to using functions, because I mean, through my layman's understanding of compute like Azure Functions, I mean, typically Azure gives you kind of public endpoints to hook into to run these functions, but I'm presuming that there are options that you can kind of run these across a private network, which I don't know, I guess maybe that's why businesses want to use VNets, is it? Or, to offer that kind of private endpoint functionality, or does it work differently with functions?
I mean, the way an Azure function works is it's always triggered by something. So what makes your function run is that something happens. Now that can be an awful lot of things. In this system that I've been building some stuff for the 2021 census for the past couple of years, and the way that works is obviously that messages come in, they land on the service bus queue, and then functions comes in and takes all those millions of messages and processes them and does things. So in that sort of situation, there's no public endpoint involved, and you're fine. But what you can also do is you can also trigger on HTTP. So essentially, you can actually run an API using Azure Functions. You can just expose your endpoints and have people hit that as an API, which is great and good. And you can then have this beautifully scalable API. But yes, it does leave you open to that sort of, like I say, denial of wallet attack, where somebody comes in and hits your endpoint repeatedly. And if you haven't got it properly locked down, then that can scale up as far until some sort of alarm goes off, and either your budget limit gets hit, or until Azure Monitor, sort of pings somebody and says, "Oh, you should be looking at this." So yeah, if you're running an API in using Azure Functions, you're going to need to do something for that. So you can either you can actually run Azure Functions on a traditional app service hosting plan if you want, which is one way, or you can run it on a premium plan, which is the recommended way. Or you can wrap something like API management or Cloudflare around the front of it, so there's something there that will block denial of service before it becomes your
problem. Some sort of like a web application firewall type of scenario
so,
that you can
just
get.
Something that's going to say, okay, we're going to restrict the number of calls from an IP address so that they I can't just get flooded.
Or you could put deny lists and things like that, I guess, a little bit like a firewall.
If somebody
firewall,
is hitting you and you want to get rid of it, then you can go in and just block them. But there's nothing built into Azure Functions for that. So then you need something on front of that. I suppose it's worth mentioning as well as the traditional hosting plans. So you've got your consumption plan, you've got your premium plan, you've got even your trad app service. I'm not sure. I don't think they've actually deprecated it. They don't recommend it anymore. They always recommend premium. I think you might still be able to do that if you're on more of a budget.
So that app service plan is literally like spinning up an app service for a traditional web app service plan.
You can just so if you remember the old days of web jobs, you can essentially do it like web jobs. Azure Functions is actually based on the web jobs runtime initially. Originally.
Okay.
But the nice thing about Azure Functions, and one of the things that sets it apart from the competition, is that it's got an open source runtime. So although the consumption plan gives you that idea of you don't need to care about the servers. If you want to run it on servers, so if you want to run it on premises, or if you want to run it on Kubernetes, or if you want to run it on another cloud, you can do that. It is open source. You can deploy it to a container image. You can just run the runtime on any old Linux box or Windows box. And in Kubernetes in particular, there's a thing called KEDA, which you might have heard of. It stands for Kubernetes Event-Driven Auto-Scaling. And what you can do with that is you can get KEDA to watch the same things that your functions are triggering off and actually run up more pods in your Kubernetes cluster when the sources of work get busier, so that you can actually do that scaling part for you, like as if you had a consumption plan. And if you hook that into Azure Container Instances or Redgate, if you were running Kubernetes on Amazon or something like that, then you can actually get something pretty close to the Azure Functions experience, but running in Kubernetes. So something that you can then lift and shift to whichever cloud or premises thing or whatever you want. So these days is an abstract. It's come a long way from the original Azure Functions, which was just the consumption plan, and you're going to run this on the consumption plan, and that's what you're getting.
Yeah, and I suppose everything you described there. I've been keeping up. Don't get me wrong. I'm not a developer by a long stretch, but I've been keeping up and trying to relate it to things that I've done in the past. And obviously, when we're talking about functions, to kind of bring it back to the basic kind of terms, I guess the one thing that I relate to was I did a little bit of you can call it development work if you like, but it was playing around back in the sort of early 2000s, late 90s with web services and the SOAP protocol. So, essentially, it's a bit like, having a function, I guess, or a method, something there that will do something for you, given it some criteria or sending in some parameters. But then they were running effectively over the HTTPS web protocol in order to kind of consume and do something for you. Am I right in thinking that's basically what an Azure function is that it's just a wrapped bit of code that you can call off to go and do something in another system or another platform or whatever it is that you want to do?
Yeah, I mean, it's literally, it's called Azure Function because it runs a function in your code. So, you deploy code, a Python, just a Python module, or, sort of a bit of .NET or some Java or some JavaScript, some Node or whatever. But you literally just deploy that code. You can, in fact, you can actually literally type it into the portal if you really want to. If it's a scripting language, you can actually type code into the portal. And the way a lot of people actually come to serverless is through jobs, just scheduled jobs. So if you've got web job, cron jobs or something like that, which is just something that you want to do something once a day or once an hour or once every 15 minutes or whatever. It's a really easy way of setting that up without having to actually deploy that onto a server somewhere. So, if you want something that just goes and fetches a bit of information from a database, processes it and shoves it off into sends an email about it or something like that, you can do that with an Azure function. And again, it will do that. It will charge you for the amount of time it was running, and a few fractions of pence, and then shut down again. And you don't need to worry about keeping a virtual machine or something running all the time just to handle that little cron job in the background.
I'm with you. Yeah. So I mean, in terms of running jobs like that, Mark, I mean, are there kind of limits within the actual platform itself? So if you've got a nice, quick, easy task that you just want to run, like you say, once a day, run this, get a bit of data out of a database and spit it out over there, then great. But are there any kind of limitations on the sizes of jobs that you can run? Because I know some processing can, I guess, keep a job or a function open for potentially hours or days even. I mean, are there any limits like that in functions?
Yeah, I mean, the original limit, in the consumption plan was that, by default, your function had to complete within 5 minutes, or you could push that up to 10 minutes by setting configuration options. Now, of course, that's because it was the consumption plan, and that's something that's put there to limit, the amount of use what you're putting through the consumption plan. Sure. If you're running on a premium plan or in Kubernetes or anything else, then that limit isn't there. So yes, in theory, you can run that as long as you want. The other thing you've got is a thing called durable functions, which is a really neat piece of code that they've written, which allows you to essentially hook together individual functions using an orchestrator. And without going into too much in the details of how it does it, it allows you to have something that looks like it's a function that's running for a long time, but in fact it goes to sleep.
Okay.
So what you will do is you will call off to another function. So for instance, if you have something that needs to go and get information from 1,000 different places, and then wait until those are all done, and then pull it all together at the end and do something else with it, you can have an orchestrator function, and what it will do is it can fire off 1,000 different functions.
Okay.
But it then goes to sleep and waits for all those functions to finish. But from the point of view of your code, you never see that. It just looks to you like a perfectly normal piece of code calling out to methods and waiting till they're done, just the normal way that you would do in sort of just using normal asynchronous programming.
Okay.
But they've done a lot of work around the back of that to make that look like normal code that you would run that was just running through normally, just statement after statement, when in fact it's waking up, going to sleep, checking how things are going, waking up, going to sleep, waking up, going to sleep, until finally it's time to go, and then carrying on, so that you don't have to have, A, you're not paying for that amount of time that you're running, and B, you're making more efficient use of the platform that you're running on. So that's it won't do everything, obviously, but that's a way you can get around most of the long running things.
It's just trying to plug those gaps, I suppose, for when you are trying to develop these kind of applications and you've got specific requirements like that. I'm guessing. I suppose. Yeah, go on, Mark. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just saying. I mean, this might be a point at which we might jump off from. We've been talking about Azure Functions all the way through here, but of course, there's a lot of other serverless stuff. Depending on the definition of serverless.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's what I was going to say. Then is obviously from a functions perspective, that is one element of what we hear being banded around as serverless compute. I mean, from my perspective, functions is very much around the kind of the developer tool, in the developer's tool bag, where you're writing code and, being Azure, it's open to whatever coding language, I think, within reason that you require, I guess. Is it within function?
Yeah. If you've got containers now, you can run any language you want as long as it talks HTTP.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think then, so taking that a stage further, when, what other things have we got in the serverless kit bag, so to speak, to kind of do, I hear a lot about this kind of low code and no code kind of concept.
Yeah.
What have we got on the serverless side that kind of gives us that ability or to use the full plethora of your dev skills if you need to?
Yeah, so if we go back to that example I gave, where pulling something from a database and sending out an email based on that. That is something that you could very easily do with a logic app. So a logic app, if it's kind of it's very similar to Microsoft Flow if you ever use that, or Power Automate or whatever they call it. It's now called Power Automate, but you still create flows with Power Automate. But it used to be called Microsoft.
I'm with you.
Yeah. But essentially, it's a very similar sort of thing in that something triggers that workflow, and then it goes off and runs it. The difference with a logic app is that you're generally building that workflow in a visual designer. With these days you've got drag and drop, but you're building a visual workflow. So you drop something on, you create something on the canvas that says, okay, I will trigger when somebody adds something to the database, and then the next one down will be something where you can check the information in that and say, depending on whether this element of it is 0 or non-zero, go off in 2 different directions, and then one of those might be to send an email. And so and the really nice thing about logic apps is that as well as having this workflow where you don't have to be a developer really to build it, it's also got hundreds and hundreds of connectors. So if you want to send an email, all you do is you drop in the Office 365 Outlook connector, you give it a one-time authorization to say which account you want to send from, and then you just fill in there, I want the subject to be this, I want the body to be this, I want some of that information to be the bits that I got from the database in the earlier step, and it will then hook that all up for you, so you can in just in literally 5 minutes you can have something that takes something that came from somewhere, manipulates it into an email, and sends that email off to somebody. So I've got something that does that for RSS feeds, for instance. I just use the RSS trigger, so I say when something is published to this RSS feed, send me an email about it. So
it's pretty cool technology. I was going to quickly ask then, Mark. I mean, in terms, you mentioned Power Automate there, and in terms of that low code, no code kind of interface that people can kind of jump in and drag connectors and little widgets and glue them all together to do something. What are the differences between kind of a logic app interface, which is kind of surfaced through the Azure portal, as opposed to the Power Automate version of that? Are they based on the same platform, or are they 2 separately different things?
They're certainly based on the same infrastructure. Power Automate is very much a managed solution. Logic Apps is kind of going the same way as Azure Functions did, in that they're now providing more hosting options and giving you more options in whether you've got a stateless workflow or a stateful workflow, and where you store that state. Whereas Power Automate will just be Power Automate, and that's just you give it a workflow and it runs.
Okay. If
you're a pure end user who just wants to build workflows, then Power Automate is probably your thing. Obviously, the other big difference is licensing.
Of course.
So the way you pay for those is going to be very different. Logic Apps at its base level is again a serverless type thing where you don't know about the servers, you don't know how many are running, and you're just paying per invocation and for the amount of time it's running. So it's a very similar pricing model to Azure Functions. So that's probably the biggest difference between them is purely.
I mean, it's like everything with Microsoft licensing. You're right. I think they put certain products in certain SKUs, and you get what you pay for, sort of thing. But so I mean, I'm right in thinking then. So Logic Apps is more or less for the developer person or developer type.
So somebody with a bit more knowledge of what's going on, at least in Azure, and doesn't need to necessarily be a developer, but if you're a cloud solution architect, you're probably going to build a Logic App into your solution rather than Power Automate.
No, absolutely. And I think it's just cool to try and understand that they are almost based on the same platform, but they're kind of surfaced for different reasons. I mean, cool. So we talked about Azure Functions, durable functions, Logic Apps. I mean, what else have we got in the kit bag of serverless?
Now again, it depends how you define serverless. But if you look at serverless as essentially, that thing of you don't care about the infrastructure and you want a consumption-based pricing model, then there's all sorts of things that can fit into that. Now, specifically, if you think about data, the one thing that people always used to hit when they were running functions in the old days was that it's all very well having something that scales up to infinity, but if you've still got a SQL Server at the back end there, then that's going to become a bottleneck. So you either need to scale that up huge and keep it huge, which, as we all know, is not cheap for Azure SQL, or you have to, sort of live with the fact that at some point you're going to get lots of retry messages back from it saying sorry. So, again, if we go back to right at the dawn of Azure, there was actually Azure Storage in there. So, the tables and queues and blobs and things, and that is essentially a serverless platform, because again, it's just storing stuff for you, and you don't care, you know nothing about the computers that storage is being hosted on. Sure. And you're only paying for the amount of stuff that you're storing in there, and it'll cost more, for a little bit more for your premium blobs storage and your hot blob storage, just for your archive and things like that. But at the end of the day, you're just paying for the amount of stuff you've got in there, or in the case of a queue, the amount of traffic that you're pushing through it. So that's serverless, and that was the way people approached it for a while. That's when I was doing my sports app, I did that based on table storage mostly. But these days, Azure SQL now has a serverless tier, so you can, if you go to the vCore model, and you can turn on serverless, and it will allow you to specify essentially the maximum throughput that you're going to support, but it will then allow you to go between that and maybe a tenth of that traffic, I think, or a quarter of that traffic. But based on whatever maximum you give it, it will then allow you to scale anywhere between that maximum and a very small fraction of that maximum, depending on how much traffic is going through. And they've also now got the same thing for Cosmos. So they've got an auto scale in Cosmos. So rather than having to say I need exactly 400 RUs or 4,000 RUs, again, you can say, right, I want a maximum of 40,000 RUs, but feel free to scale that down to as low as it needs to be. I can't remember the exact multiplier, but again, it's a fraction of a small fraction of your maximum.
So what you're saying then, so in the PaaS terms, when you were deploying these, even in platform as a service, was when you had to specifically say the size that you wanted your PaaS service was obviously correlating to that underlying infrastructure that you were invariably splitting up. Is that what you're saying, that they kind of are shifting more towards that?
So in the case of SQL, you used to have to specify either a number of DTUs that you would support, or a number of vCores and an amount of memory that you had.
Oh, interesting.
And if you want, you could programmatically scale those. So if it was getting busy, you could put triggers in to Azure Monitor that said, that fired off a runbook that actually scaled that up. But that's not ideal. So they now have built into the platform that it will only charge you for the amount you're putting through up to whatever maximum you've specified.
Yeah, sure.
Obviously, that costs a bit more. The overall cost per DTU, whatever, or RU, will be more in that situation. But if you've got a relatively variable amount of traffic going through it, then it's probably going to end up cheaper than trying to fix it at a specific level.
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that sounds pretty cool. It's something that I've not come across yet. So I'll have to have a little read into that then. So obviously that's happening on SQL, on Cosmos DB. I mean, are there any other kind of areas that...
I mean, I think, most of the APIs, I think Cassandra, for instance, if you're using Cosmos as Cassandra, it can do that. And if you're using it as table storage, obviously it can do that. So I think, I'm not sure whether they've got to all the APIs yet, but I think most of the APIs now support that auto scale. It's not yet in things like the managed MySQL or the managed Postgres. So, if you're using Postgres in the back end, then at least at the moment, I don't think you can do a full serverless thing. Right. I wouldn't be surprised if it's coming along, because AWS has that, and if AWS have it, then Azure gets it soon.
Well, I mean, it's like everything in Azure, isn't it? It's just keep an eye on the updates and wait and see when it's in public preview. And I'm sure it will be there. It's just a question of when.
This is the thing. Everything is starting to head towards this, this serverless model now. You're getting fewer and fewer things where you just say, okay, give me a lump of tin, and I will pay for that lump of tin. Except, ironically, in the premium plan. So if you've got, I mean, all serverless stuff is based on a message-driven pattern. The events happening and it responding to the events and doing stuff. And for instance, if you've got service bus, service bus again is kind of a serverless thing. you pay for the amount of messages that you're putting through it. But if you go premium on Service Bus, then again, you're then suddenly paying for messaging units, which are again just instances of a Service Bus. So
you're getting kind of dedicated instances, I guess, to support the requirement that you have.
So you're not sharing your infrastructure with anybody. And again, this is more of an enterprise thing, that they want to guarantee that they're not living with anybody else, and that it'll be nice and predictable and nice and stable, and they're paying fixed amounts. And so that's where I lose it, because I'm an individual developer. I like to build things the best and most efficient way, and then some enterprise comes along somewhere and says, right, okay, we need VNets and premium this and premium that, and I think, no, you're ruining it all.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really, I suppose this is where we're at, because fundamentally the way that I would look at it is, look, we are on the bleeding edge of technology, and there's certainly a hearts and minds conversation. In every other area of IT, you've got to win the people that sign the checks. You've got to win their hearts and minds at the end of the day with the fact that this kind of new technology is actually there, it's doing its job. And I guess, I don't know, I've spoken with a lot of people around kind of keeping your own skills up to date. So how that translates to business with getting that confidence. And I know certainly lots of businesses don't like to be that first, first leading business onto this new technology. Absolutely. And maybe that's just a timing thing, I guess, that it's like everything. And, I suppose, like I alluded to there, keeping on top of your own skills. I'm still speaking with customers that are literally just starting off on their cloud journey. So really getting them from that traditional kind of data center, hardware based CapEx model into this OpEx world. And even that is tough for some businesses still today. And I guess when we talk about technologies like serverless, to me, that's taking it on to the next stage after that. So it's almost like businesses have got this maturity model of where they are on that pipeline of, being completely infrastructure on-prem or in a data center to, completely using the state-of-the-art technology. And I guess somewhere along the scale, that's where a lot of businesses are.
This is why I am a qualified and as cloud solutions architect, and I've occasionally been put forward to people as this is our cloud solution architect, but the first step of that is always okay, we've got this stuff and we want to put it in the cloud. So the first step is always just they want to get as close as possible to lift and shift. So and that's where you get these the cloud is just somebody else's computer, because they're just treating the cloud essentially as just another data center, another ISP, something like that. And where where I am is, what I wanted to do is to use the cloud in ways that only the cloud can be used, and that's very much where serverless is that because serverless, because the cloud gives you that elasticity and flexibility to be able to run up containers or machines or whatever in as much as you want whenever you want it. That's where you actually get the benefit of the cloud. So I very much would be concentrating on the stage of get rid of that VM, get rid of that static thing there. Sort of look at how you could be doing that with a little bit of re-architecture or a bit of refactoring, a bit of recoding. Look what you could be, the money you could be saving, the performance gains you could be getting, the elasticity you could be getting. So that's where I come from. And yes, I will go in and I will tell them how to configure a VM if they really want to know. But
I guess it spins up lots of different conversations that maybe businesses aren't used to having, like, going from that traditional capital expenditure. I bought a piece of tin. I'm going to sweat that as an asset for the next 5 years. I know what I've paid and I'll depreciate the value of that tin over time. To now, okay, now I want to take the thing that tin is actually doing, which to a finance person or to some C-level exec in a company, they don't know what that piece of tin is actually doing, but it's running business logic. So when you've got to take that logic out of that tin and put it into the cloud, I suppose the questions of, right, okay, how often is your application going to be accessed by, what kind of traffic are you going to get? And don't get me wrong, is I guess stuff that businesses would have if they've got all of those monitoring solutions in place and they can provide that. But I guess if they've spun it up and they've been running on a legacy application and they're looking to transform that, I mean, do you have those kind of conversations with customers and, about, right, now it's in the cloud using serverless, your costs could be something from X amount right the way through to X amount. Do you have to have many of those conversations, and how do they go down, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, sometimes, you're banging your head against a brick wall, and you fail quickly and say, no, I want this because I know how much it will cost, and that's more important to me than actually saving money. Potentially, is just to have a predictable cost, and fair enough. If that's the way they want to go, then that's where they want to go. But if for instance, if that server there is just a file server, for instance, you need to go, at least run through the Azure pricing calculator and look and say, well, you could run it on a VM. This is how much the VM was cost, but based on how much stuff you've got in there, and pricing up Azure files, or something, for instance, look at the difference there, and then you're not going to run out of disk space. You're not going to run out of capacity. You get that scalability all built in, so you can now forget about that entirely, and your ops team
absolutely
going to do something more useful at that time.
And I think that's like, it's like, I joked before we started recording that I know enough to be dangerous with serverless to a point, but I'm certainly not a developer. I've certainly not used it in my 9-to-5 day job. I'm kind of the other end of the scale, helping businesses out of their traditional mindsets, I suppose, into so I get it, I see it and understand it completely. And I guess it's just it's interesting to see those different conversations. So I'm completely with you. There's certain things that as a developer or an operations person, you'll be fixated. Well, I want to do this because it'll save me a lot of time and effort, or it's the most efficient way that we can do it from a development perspective. But then to translate that into business goals and business justifications, it's almost like you've got this whole meandering set of conversations that have to feed into that. And like I alluded to, for me, sometimes it's winning those hearts and minds and just, come on, this is where you want to go.
To be honest, most of the time it actually comes from the customer at some point. I said I was working on something for the census there. Now, the reason I was working on that was because they essentially, they were, providing a service, a solution to the Office of National Statistics, and it was something that was designed, it was a really nice system, but it was designed basically for SMEs and was in no way ready to scale up to the scale of the UK census.
Sure.
So that was the point at which they said, right, we're going to need something that allows us to keep the SME scale, but also scale up to the size of the census. So that's where they started thinking, right, we're going to have to do something with the cloud and serverless and things. So, that's, sometimes that's what happens. Is just that something happens where they say, right, okay, our model isn't going to be able to handle this, or at least not without spending huge amounts of money on tin that we're not going to need half the time.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's just great to see how these developments in the cloud platforms are enabling lots of different ways of working and app development that I suppose haven't been around in the past because of that sheer investment or that sheer cost that has been associated with those kind of things.
It also makes your development process a lot cheaper because if you've got a development environment and a UAT environment and a sort of test environment, a staging environment, a production environment, if they're all serverless, then when you're not using them, which is most of the time for a development environment, you're not paying for them. So again, you can actually save a fair bit of money just on that side of things.
No, absolutely. So, I mean, well, what have we covered off now, Mark? We've gone through functions, we've gone through logic apps, and we touched on SQL and other database services, kind of going more to that sort of serverless way of being able to be deployed and managed. Are there any other areas that we haven't touched on?
We kind of covered the Kubernetes side of things. Which is, certainly a place that serverless is going. But I mean, essentially, I suppose the other thing we should probably cover off is the web side of things. Just to cover. Have you heard of static web apps?
It seems to be quite prevalent at the moment. Yeah, it seems to be talked about quite a lot.
Yeah. Now, what that does is it implements a thing, which is commonly known as the Jamstack. Now, that's a term that was coined by Netlify, who were really the first company to provide this sort of service. But the way that works is rather than having a web server, a traditional WordPress server or a traditional ASP.NET MVC server or something that's running a website, and the code's running on the server, and the same thing is serving the content and is doing the processing. What you do in the Jamstack, which stands for JavaScript APIs and Markup, is it's more around the SPA sort of model. So what you do is you have your content, so the stuff you're serving, the HTML, the CSS, the JavaScript files, they're all static. So they're literally just in storage somewhere, and specifically usually in a CDN, so that people can load that information really fast. And then all the code that happens is client-side callbacks to Azure Functions. So again, that means that your website can also be serverless, because you've got your content and storage. So A, it's really, really fast to respond, and B, you're only paying for the bandwidth and the storage costs rather than paying for something, the server to be sitting there serving that all the time. And B, when the actual business logic needs to run, that's then using a serverless function to return that information. So say if you've got React on the front end or something, then it calls off, gets the information from the back end, and does all the jiggery pokery in the UI to make that do whatever it is you need to do. So you can even run blogs and stuff like that with it as well. You've got generators around the back end, things like Hugo and Jekyll and stuff, which allow you to essentially take your database and turn it into a website.
Sure.
So just do regular publishes every time something changes. So every time you publish a blog post or change something or something like that, it literally just recompiles, or as it were, rebuilds your website and shoves it out to storage, which is great for versioning as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's funny enough, it's been something I've been speaking with a few friends and colleagues about quite recently, is this rise of static content web services. And like you say, it is still in preview, is it, at the moment? I think it is with the static web apps.
At the moment,
yeah. So I mean, it's certainly.
I mean, what are the? You won't do Apex domains, for instance, at the moment, which is annoying. But
yeah, I think I read somewhere that even that was going in. So the root domain was even might have not been for the static web apps, but I know there's something coming with the Apex domain thing. I think I read not long ago, actually.
They promised it's coming soon, and there are workarounds. If you can do the right fiddles in your DNS, then you can do workarounds for it. But
no, absolutely. So I mean, that's quite a valid thing, because of course, in the rise of mobile apps and effectively web-based apps that are doing something, whether they be iOS or Android applications. I mean, how do you see kind of these static web apps fitting in? Is it something you think is going to grow in terms of being able to serve out, other interactive type style websites, or what's the pathway from your perspective?
I mean, Netlify, for instance, as I said, the whole of the Netlify infrastructure, all the management plane, and sort of all the stuff that you use to manage the system is all Jamstack. They're eating their own dog food. The Azure portal is essentially a Jamstack site. It's running Knockout, but it's running something which calls off to the Azure API and renders stuff in the front end. So and at the other end, you can turn a WordPress site. There's several large publishing companies have essentially put a Jamstack site to replace their WordPress. So whatever you're doing, it certainly can be done. It's just one of those things. It's like serverless, and you need to have a little bit of a mindset shift to go from the traditional way of doing things to the serverless way of doing things. So to go from, for instance, procedural to event-driven, or to go from server-generated code to static code and back-end APIs. But once you've got your head around that, then you can do anything. So serverless first is very much a thing which people are looking at now. Is that you should really, if you're doing it from scratch, be able to set up just about anything you want to set up completely serverless these days.
I mean, that's pretty cool to see. I mean, it's certainly educated me, Mark, this conversation, because there's, I think it's one of those things. If you are in and around the world of Azure, you will hear obviously these terminologies and these technologies that are being released, and you think, do I need to know that, or do I not need to know that? I mean, I don't know how you find that, Mark, being a developer now, but there's this joke that you can't potentially, possibly learn everything there is to know about Azure. You learn what you need to. You learn what you need to do. I mean, just on that note, how do you find that being a developer using Azure, in terms of keeping up to date with the latest things that are coming into preview or going into general availability? Do you have the same struggles as I do?
I imagine so. I spend an awful lot of my time watching YouTube videos on double speed. It's very weird. I must admit, listening to you at single speed.
You don't watch me. I'm a lot faster. Am I on double speed? Obviously, it doesn't affect the pitch of my voice, does it?
Yes, and I'm kind of missing having a commute for the podcasts as well. But...
No, absolutely. I mean, it's just a different age we're in at the moment, isn't it? I think technology has taken this incredible boost over the last few years, and of course, factor COVID in, and we've all got a lot more time on our hands, so to speak. I don't know. It just seems that technology's been exponentially kind of accelerated at the moment, and it doesn't do me any favors with knowing the kind of things that you need to learn and stay on top of. So, just wondered if you had the same problems there.
Yeah, I mean, basically, I'm just subscribed to all the Microsoft YouTube channels, and I'm subscribed to several podcasts, and I just basically consume that as often as I can.
Yeah,
try and keep up with everything.
No, absolutely. I guess at some point you use real world examples or projects or contracts that you're working on to kind of flex those muscles and actually put into practice all the stuff that you kind of learn and watch and read about. So
most of the battle is just knowing that things are out there, and then hoping that something comes along soon where you get a chance to actually play with it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Static web apps are there. You might not build something immediately, but at least that that's there, and that next time somebody's building something web-based, that you can at least think about whether that might be a good model for it.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's just quite cool to see the advances, and whereas before in the traditional sense we would have some kind of product release every few years in a particular area, and you'd learn it and stay on top of that. But now it's literally is. I think, I joked at the start of this conversation that I'm an operations person, but I do feel that I'm very much having to become a developer as every day goes by, to be honest, Mark. So I mean, on that note, just to kind of get your kind of perspective on things from an operations point of view, I think we touched on a few earlier with some of the conversations that you might get frustrated that, logically you're creating something that is fit for business. I mean, do you come across those kind of hurdles more often than not, or do you just tend to find that you're being asked to work on projects where that has been kind of signed, sealed, and delivered? That's the way you're going to work. I mean,
no, I'm called it. I mean, for instance, one of the clients I'm working for at the moment, I'm building out a whole pile of bicep for them because they want to get the whole DevOps chain going, and take the code that they've got and actually get that deployed in infrastructure as code. So there's certainly it's not just building bits and pieces. There's you certainly do come across the whole ops side of things. Ops can't avoid dev, and dev can't avoid ops.
No, but I get the feeling that ops is becoming more dev. Like I say, I think
that's the thing. With the cloud, everything is whether it's Terraform or ARM or whatever, everything is becoming declarative in code. So you're not going around and like you say, provisioning machines and changing network cards and stuff. But you've still got a hell of a lot of work to do to sort of keep an eye on what's in there and make sure that things aren't sort of running at too high a cost, and that if the connectivity between here and there isn't broken, and your cross-regional failovers are all set up and ready to go, and all that
Oh
stuff.
no,
That
there's
devs don't have to care
definitely
about.
definitely enough work for operations people out there. Absolutely, and I guess it's just
changed. Like you say, it's just changed an awful lot from the days of provision a new server for us in the rack, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just interesting because like personally, I've been around IT for decades now, and you kind of reflect on cycles of how things happen over that time. And I think, when Satya Nadella announced around this tech intensity back probably 4 or 5 years ago now, at the time it's like tech intensity. What does that mean? Where are we going with that? And it's just, I chuckle now looking at where we are today, in the sense that if you are an operations person, I don't know, maybe it's different if you're a dev person. I don't know. I like to think I've got a little finger in the dev camp. I'm not a developer, but I kind of get points and elements of it. And I certainly got conceptual awareness, I suppose, is probably the best way of putting it. But maybe to operations people, this whole tech intensity has come as a shock, to say it bluntly. As much as businesses and business decision makers have got things they need to kind of make decisions on based on something, there's a huge learning curve. Is my experience, compared to what we've probably been used to in the past. So yeah, for me, we're living tech intensity at the moment, which is literally just learning everything.
From a dev point of view, writing code hasn't, there's improvements being made in C# and things, and sort of things, libraries are being improved and stuff. But there's not nearly as much velocity there as there is in just purely where you're going to run it, the patterns you're going to use, like I say, the event-driven, side of things, all the ways that you're getting your code out there and what you're making it do. The actual writing of code is becoming less and less of a thing. It's all about plugging things together and your little bit of business logic plus all these things that you're sticking into it and plugging it in to make a whole system. So it's very much the same sort of thing. We're kind of learning the same things, we're just looking at them from slightly different angles.
Yeah, and that's the cool thing, because obviously I'm getting to speak to cool people like you that have got some brilliant experiences and kind of helping share the knowledge, I guess, with experience and where we're going. And for me, that's what it's all about at the moment. And why I do these videos is kind of for me to ask the stupid, simple questions that, look, this is where I struggle. And then to speak to the likes of yourself, Mark, and you go, well, it's this, and this. And you go, right, okay, I get it now. So, I mean, hopefully that's the reason that I do these videos, is, like I say, it's just to kind of help if I'm feeling the pain. And I don't consider myself to be anything special in the IT world, but I think it's fair to say I've been around long enough to know that what I am doing and saying is probably going to be familiar with most people in my position, So hopefully that makes a bit of sense to people watching this now anyway. But I mean, Mark, it's been brilliant to speak to you. We're doing really well in terms, I mean, we're over the hour mark now. I mean, are there any other elements that you think we want to kind of touch upon in terms of serverless before we wrap up this video?
I think we've largely covered serverless there. I think, just one thing, just while you're talking about the whole community and knowledge sharing side of things, I was just going to say, that's one thing I really am looking forward to, getting back and seeing people in a room, talking to people in a room, because that's where my community thing comes alive. I'm not so much stand there and perform a piece to camera and stop, or sit there and write the blog post and stop. I'm very much about going and doing a talk. But the interesting bit is I went and did a talk at Ignite, and the talk itself was half an hour or so. But you've then you spend an hour after that, people coming up to you and asking you about their particular situations, and being able to actually talk to them about their specific issues and problems and scenarios, and that I'm just missing that so much.
No, I echo that completely, Mark. I think it's great, like you say. I'm normally one of the guys sat in the audience watching you, Mark. And watching people like you giving these great talks. And it's such a difficult scenario that we're in now, I suppose. And having that connection with other people, and parting your knowledge that way for specific reason, not on a general, like, this is how you can do things, because I think there is a lot of that kind of content going around, isn't there? But I agree completely. Hopefully not too much longer now, eh?
Well, I've got my first vaccine in me now. So.
Yeah, well, there we go. It's all starting to happen now, isn't it? I think we're over halfway. I think now in the UK, aren't we, in terms of vaccinations?
Yeah,
so
roundabout, yeah.
Well, in Wales, we don't have to stay local anymore, which is a bonus. We can,
oh, no,
I think, I mean, you're in North. Did you say it was Northern Ireland you are, Mark?
Yeah.
So
right.
I don't know what the rules and regulations are like with you guys at the moment.
They've done a little bit of opening up, but you're still not allowed really to go very far, and they've refused to put any dates on anything. So.
Okay. Well, I know England's open up fairly soon. Next week, I think they're starting to relax. I mean, by the time this video goes out, we'll probably be into the third wave, no doubt, but hopefully not. I mean, that's the problem, isn't it? But Mark, this has been fantastic.
Watching and wants me to come and talk at their group when as and when sort of travel is allowed again, then let me know.
Well, yeah, I mean, on that note, Mark, have you got a website, a blog, YouTube? Obviously, we've got your Twitter handle on the screen there.
No, I'm just on Twitter and LinkedIn, really.
Cool. Well, I mean, I'll stick.
Yeah, I have a markxa.com, but I have not updated it in years.
Well, all of those links we'll stick in a little article to accompany this video. I mean, Mark, it's been really great. I mean, thanks so much for giving up your time and come and have a chat with me and educating me.
To a real person.
Well, now and again, isn't it? Even though it's over the camera, I got to wear these silly headphones. We get there. But Mark, thanks so much. We'll wrap up the video there, and no doubt I'll catch you across Twitter world at some point in the not too distant future.
Yeah. That was all that quality content. You can't resist it.
Absolutely. Now, cheers, Mark. I'll speak to you soon.
Yeah, it's been great. Really fun.